It seems like a lot of things Asian are increasingly trendy nowadays, but racist stereotyping has very deep roots. I will show you the example of a woman on social media who recently learned that the hard way. Inspired by the popularity of Asian eye makeup trends, this lady who was white but made up to look Asian even claimed she actually was. That was until she started getting both racist comments targeting her presumed Asianness, as well as criticism for having appropriated another race. But at this point, she decided that, thankfully, since she was white to begin with, she could simply take off her makeup, and look what a miraculous solution to her problem that was. But it's not like all Asian people can or want to take off their face to combat racism. And that brings me to the subject I wanted to talk about today. The West's growing interest for some East Asian countries, notably China, Korea, and Japan, and its repercussions today. In particular, I would like to try to examine if today's representation of East Asian culture has led to real valorization, or if negative stereotypes have just taken a new form. And what does that mean for identity? As always, in order to do that, we need to start by looking at the past. But first, a disclaimer. Most of my historical examples are from the United States of America, but clearly the stereotyping I will talk about has been shared across the Western world. In the mid-1800s, the majority of the Chinese in the US were immigrant men employed as temporary, low-cost laborers. Anti-Chinese propaganda and public slander were a concrete example of what was known as the Yellow Peril, a racist color metaphor for the fear of Asian invasion in the West. Subsequently, images of Chinese women as promiscuous presented a justification for anti-Chinese and sexist legislations, such as the Page Act of 1875, which banned Asian women from entering the US, or the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. There is an ugly truth in wars such as the Philippine-American War, World War II, the Vietnam or even the Korean War, which is sexual collateral damage, with American soldiers often soliciting Asian women and referring to them in highly derogatory and offensive terms. The whole situation is a paradox in the sense that Asian women were demonized for being dirty, spreading diseases, but at the same time, they were sexualized because of the West's desire to, let's say, engage in the activities of the backwards for a unique bit of fun and freedom that you just can't get back home. And this is not even an exaggeration of what many were thinking during that time. Moving on to the late 19th century literature, the stories of Asian women were specifically told or imagined by white men. For example, Madame Chrysanthème or Madame Butterfly, the latter of which glorifies the suffering and servitude of an Asian woman and her love for her white man. The silver screen of Hollywood during the 1930s reflected this US sentiment towards Asians as a result of current political events. Most Asian women were played by white women who would tape their eyelids to create slanty exotic eyes, as Asians and white people were prohibited from kissing on screen. As for Asian men, their negative portrayal in cinema did not stop. For instance, movies such as Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1961 or 16 Candles in 1984, where the Asian character appears with a gong chiming at his every appearance. Or even later narratives where Asian men are seen on screen as socially and sexually awkward, hardly ever to be seen as romantic interests. Okay, now please bear with me as I put all of this in more academic words, but I promise it's really important to understand everything. Edward Said was a cultural literary theorist, and in 1978 he established the term Orientalism as some sort of critical concept to describe the West's commonly contemptuous depiction of the East, that is, the Orient. What Said discovered was, according to Dr. Rainer Henrich, an expert in East Asian studies, was that bodies of the East are always represented in a particular way, that is, in opposition to the West. If the West is strong, the East is weak. If the West is masculine, then the East is feminine. But that leads to seeing a masculine body as feminine and a feminine body as hyper-feminine. And this implies, on the one hand, that the Orient is objectified in terms of culture and geography as some sort of distant foreign land needing to be conquered. And on the other hand, the Oriental is objectified in terms of race and gender. As you have heard, the negative Said's reflections are based on his observations of authors such as Gustave Flaubert, a famous French author. I will now read an extract from the introduction of Said's Orientalism, where he himself quotes Gustave Flaubert, who during a trip to Egypt meets a woman called Kuchikanem, and she'll become a key figure in his Orientalist accounts of the East. Flaubert then proceeds to generalize all Asian women on the basis of his sole encounter with Kuchikanem. It's as if you saw a person from Iceland who was a baker, and suddenly you assume that everyone from Iceland is a baker. Can you see how absurd that is? Going back to the extract. The local women are usually the creatures of a male power fantasy. They express a limited sensuality. They are more or less stupid, and above all, they're willing. To which Said responds, he, meaning Flaubert, was foreign, comparatively wealthy, male, which allowed him not only to possess Kuchikanem physically, but to speak for her and tell his readers in what way she was typically Oriental. The tropes of Orientalism that shaped the way Asian women were perceived are part of the same forces that socially emasculate Asian men. For example, David Hwang's 1988 play, Butterfly, where the Asian character fools for years his French lover into thinking he is a woman, and to explain why it was so easy to fool his French lover, he adds, I'm an Oriental, and being an Oriental, I could never completely be a man. As you have heard, negative stereotyping by the West of Asian people has a long history that dates back to the imperialist era and has carried on over the years. And while there have been exceptions, these negative stereotypes were not really challenged until rather recently. But in the last decade, we have witnessed almost a revolution. Cultural globalization is bringing out, for example, Korean popular music and dramas, as well as Japanese animation to the West. Also, major Hollywood films, such as Crazy Rich Asians or Everything Everywhere All at Once, have rebutted stereotypes and put Asian culture at the forefront. And all of this has been magnified by the popularity of social media platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and even YouTube. And this is, of course, very welcome. Genuine and respectful interest has, of course, grown thanks to these developments. East Asian phenotypic traits have been competing with classic beauty norms. Asian designers, actors, models have become household names, and these new raw Asian models are beneficial for forming identity. But sometimes, this fascination has been propelled to the other side of the spectrum, like this lady I referred to in my opening. She is not an isolated case, but more so part of a somewhat disturbing trend on social media of people pretending to be Asian. Another disturbing trend is, for example, the new objectification of Asian men and women as status symbols as such when it comes to relationships, rather than being appreciated for their personal qualities. Look at my new car, my new handbag, my new Asian boyfriend, where'd you get him? But the more dangerous side of this is when it gets violent. Hate crimes that have increased during the pandemic, or cases of extreme sexual violence against Asian women. In the many cases I saw, some include the assailants admitting to targeting Asian women specifically because they had a sexual preference for Asian women. But apart from direct acts of bigotry, there is a spectrum of behaviors and actions that may seem inconsequential, but that still do perpetuate stereotypes. For example, when I was younger, people would ask me if I could see with my eyes or if I ate dog at dinner. Or even more recently, I've had people scream slurs at me in the streets. What a pleasure. Sometimes on social media, Asian women continue to be referred to in stereotypical terms, where race and gender exacerbate each other, such as submissive, but also embodying family values, being quote-unquote wife material. There have even been South Asian voices that claim that it would rather be fetishized than undesired. Fetishization, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is the sexual interest in an object or person as if they were an object. These South Asian voices, they know that fetishization is bad, even if it sounds flattering in nature. But they still think it's better than not even being considered as remotely desirable or attractive. But as you can see from the definition I just gave, it is being seen like an object. So let me come back to my question. Has the West recent interest in Asian culture and its representation brought real valorization, or have existing stereotypes just take a new form? Well, I would not dare to propose a definitive answer to that, but I would describe some of the current trends that we see as what I call the dilemma of extreme stereotypes. What I mean by that is that there seems to be a number of quite opposing stereotypes that are currently coexisting. For example, Asian women have been stereotyped as exotic or subservient, while at the same time, paradoxically, as dirty and promiscuous. And this, as you should know by now, has a long history, which has been perpetuated over the years and still not yet disappeared with the more recent disturbing phenomena I have talked about. On top of that, being the model minority, Asians are expected to achieve academic greatness, have incredible hobbies, and extreme talent in every field possible. And this creates even more expectation. And all of this, mixed with genuine appreciation, is really what creates ambiguity around identity for those with East Asian phenotypic traits living in the West. Identity is not a playground, and I hope to have delivered some of my thoughts in a way that could have stirred your interest. In a way, today I have told the beginning of an unfinished story, but the way the story will continue is not within my sphere of influence. In fact, it will be a joint responsibility of many people, maybe even some of you here today. It will be awareness and dialogue that will lead the way forward, beyond this prologue I'm presenting. Thank you so much for listening.